The wind carried a sharp chill that morning at Rosefield Park, even though the sun had already climbed above the trees. It wasn't the kind of cold that made your hands numb. It was the kind that wrapped around your spine and whispered that something just wasn't right. 6-year-old Lila Parker felt it before her mother did. "Why is it so quiet here today?" she asked, her voice soft and a little unsure. Her mother, Rebecca, glanced around the park and smiled without much thought. "Maybe everyone's still at breakfast, sweetheart." But Lila didn't buy it. Rosefield was never this quiet. Usually by this hour, the laughter of kids bounced between the trees, and the squeak of the old swing set never stopped. But today, something had silenced the joy. Something was wrong. She held her mother's hand tighter as they walked past the picnic tables. Lila's eyes flicked toward the far side of the park, past the sandbox, past the swings, past the tire bridge, and settled on a cluster of adults gathered under the big red maple tree. They weren't laughing. They weren't even smiling. They were whispering, pointing, and blocking something from view. Lila tugged Rebecca's sleeve. "What are they looking at?" Rebecca followed her daughter's gaze, and her face shifted slightly. Not fear, not worry exactly, just hesitation. "Let's keep walking, honey." But Lila's feet had other plans. Drawn forward by something she couldn't name, Lila let go of her mother's hand and began tiptoeing closer to the crowd. She could hear the voices now, harsh and clipped. "Someone needs to call animal control. Look at that thing, scarred up and probably diseased. 3 days it's been lying there, refuses to move, not even scared of people, just watches. It's creepy. Those eyes, I don't trust that animal. Dangerous, could snap any second." Lila's brow furrowed. She was small, but she knew cruelty when she heard it. She squeezed through a gap between two adults, neither of whom noticed her, and stopped cold. There, at the base of the tree, was the largest dog she had ever seen. He wasn't doing anything, just lying down, ribs jutting under patchy fur, eyes clouded like storm glass. One ear flopped sideways, misshapen. His legs were drawn in tight, and his breathing was shallow. A fresh scab crossed over one eye, and dirt clung to the wounds along his legs like ash. But none of that was what made Lila's heart freeze. It was how still he was. Not like sleeping still. Not even scared still. No, this was the kind of stillness that said he didn't believe he deserved to be seen. He didn't even flinch when someone muttered, "Maybe someone threw him out. Good riddance." He didn't growl, didn't look up, didn't defend himself. But when Lila took a step closer, the dog's eyes shifted, just slightly, and found hers. That was all. A flicker of attention. And somehow, in that quiet instant, Lila felt it. A soft tug in her chest. Like the world had paused just long enough for her to hear something no one else could. "Mama," she whispered without turning around. "That dog, he's not mean, he's just invisible." Behind her, Rebecca's voice trembled. "Sweetheart, come back here, please." But Lila didn't move. She and the dog stayed like that, still as stone, watching each other from two ends of the same silence. And in the next heartbeat, the dog's tail gave the tiniest twitch. Not a wag. Not quite. More like a question. Lila took another step forward. "Lila, I said come back here." Rebecca's voice came firmer this time, the kind of voice that didn't wait for a second chance. But Lila didn't move. Her small shoes sank slightly into the wet soil as she took one more step toward the German shepherd lying beneath the maple tree. She had never seen a dog so still before, or so sad. "Is he dying?" she asked aloud, more to herself than anyone else. The murmur of the crowd paused for a moment. One man in a windbreaker snorted. That thing's been lying there for days, hasn't moved, just watches you with those eyes. I say let it finish whatever it's waiting for. You all make it sound like he's a ghost, a woman muttered with a nervous laugh. Lila crouched slowly, no closer than 10 feet from the dog, and looked right into his eyes. And what she saw wasn't haunting. It was heartbreaking. He wasn't just dirty. He wasn't just hurt. He was giving up. Not because of pain, but because no one had looked at him like he mattered in a very, very long time. His name is not Thing, Lila said suddenly, loudly. The adults turned to stare. Rebecca arrived at her daughter's side, breath short, cheeks flushed from hurrying. Lila, what are you doing? She hissed, kneeling and gripping the girl's shoulders. You can't just... What if he's sick? What if he bites? Lila didn't answer. Her eyes never left the dog. He didn't bite anyone. We don't know what he's capable of, Rebecca said, trying to soften her tone now, realizing the attention they were drawing. Honey, please, let's go play by the swings. But the German shepherd blinked slowly, and in that blink, Lila read something. Something like gratitude. I have crackers in my pocket, she said quietly. He's hungry, Mama. He looks like he hasn't eaten in days. One of the neighbors scoffed. What that animal needs is to be put down before it spreads fleas or worse. Another voice chimed in. It's not our job to play nursemaid to a stray. That last comment lit something in Lila she didn't quite recognize. Something hot and sharp and deep. She stood up straight, brushing mud from her knees. Her little fingers reached into her jacket and pulled out a crumpled package of cheese crackers. Lila, no, Rebecca warned. But Lila ignored her. She walked slowly, deliberately, and crouched again, this time within arm's reach of the dog. The shepherd didn't move, not even when the cracker landed just inches from his paw. Lila scooted back a step, then sat on the damp ground, legs crossed, and waited. It took almost a minute, but eventually, painfully slowly, the dog's nose twitched. Then his front paw stretched out. Then, like someone waking from a long sleep, he dragged himself forward just enough to sniff the cracker. He looked up at her once, and his tongue reached out. The cracker vanished. Then he rested his head on his paw again, but his eyes remained locked on Lila. The crowd murmured behind her. Someone took a video on their phone. Another shook their head and walked away. Rebecca was still kneeling, stunned into silence. Not because she had witnessed a miracle, no one else would have even called it that, but because her daughter had done what all those grown-ups couldn't. She had seen the dog. She had listened with more than her ears, and the dog had answered. Lila reached for another cracker, but her mother stopped her gently. That's enough, Rebecca whispered. We don't know what he's been through, and we can't bring this home. Lila looked up, confused. I'm not bringing him home. Then what are you doing? I'm showing him he's still here. Rebecca's breath caught. The words were too big for a 6-year-old to say, but somehow, Lila had meant every one of them. Across the grass, a woman with a golden retriever muttered, It's just one of those pitiful strays. I saw a guy throw a rock at it yesterday. It didn't even move. Lila turned sharply. Why would someone do that? The woman blinked. Because it's probably dangerous. No, it's just tired of hurting. The German shepherd stirred slightly at her voice. His tail gave a tiny, tentative wag, barely more than a twitch. Rebecca touched her forehead like she was trying to stop a headache from forming. Sweetheart, please, This isn't our fight. There are services for dogs like this. Professionals. They're gonna take him away, aren't they? Lila asked softly. Rebecca hesitated. If he stays here long enough, someone might call animal control. It's not safe to have a large stray around children. Lila stared at her mother, then at the dog. Then, without saying another word, she stood, reached into her pocket, and carefully poured the rest of her crackers at the base of the tree. The dog didn't move, but his eyes followed her the whole time. As she turned back toward her mother, she whispered, "Tomorrow, I'm bringing water." And for the first time in hours, the dog closed his eyes, not in fear, not in pain, but like he could finally rest, just a little. The next morning, the sun hung low behind a gauze of clouds, casting a pale, silver light over Rosefield Park. Lila stood at the edge of the gravel path with a thermos of water clutched in both hands, her pink rain boots barely touching the dewy grass. She had insisted on returning. Rebecca hadn't argued much this time. Something in her daughter's eyes told her that resistance would only make Lila more determined. But even now, standing beside the picnic bench with a tight grip on her car keys, Rebecca's stomach knotted with unease. "I'm just going to see if he's okay," Lila had promised. But Rebecca knew better. Her daughter wasn't going to see. She was going to connect. Lila walked alone across the open field, her small steps making no sound. She passed a pair of joggers, a mother with a stroller, and a couple tossing a tennis ball to a yellow lab. No one looked toward the maple tree. No one except her. And the dog. He was still there, exactly where she had left him, curled against the roots of the old tree, half hidden by its gnarled shadow. His ears didn't perk up at her approach, but his eyes opened the moment she stepped onto the grass. They weren't fully cloudy, not yet, but they were dim, as if time and pain had built a fog behind them. Lila crouched a few feet away and unscrewed the cap of the thermos. She poured some water into a collapsible bowl she'd taken from the back of the pantry. It still had stickers on it from when their neighbor's beagle had visited last Christmas. "Good morning," she said gently. The dog blinked. "I brought water. I don't know your name, but you look thirsty." The shepherd didn't move at first. His body remained limp, breath shallow, paws tucked under as if conserving energy. But after a long pause, long enough for Lila to wonder if he'd stop trying again, he shifted. One paw, then the other. His muscles trembled as he pushed himself upright. His left side sagged a bit, and Lila could see now how thin he truly was, every rib outlined beneath his rough, unwashed fur. He took a single step, then another, and slowly, with painful effort, the dog lowered his nose to the bowl and began to drink. Lila held her breath. This wasn't just thirst. It was surrender. Not to her, but to the idea that maybe, just maybe, someone still cared. She whispered, "You're welcome." From the distance, Rebecca watched, unmoving, hand frozen on her phone as if unsure whether to take a picture or call for help. The dog finished drinking and looked up at Lila again. That look stopped her heart. There was no tail wag this time. No dramatic change. Just recognition. Like he remembered her from another life. "Do you have a name?" she asked softly. "Did someone used to call you something gentle?" The German shepherd tilted his head ever so slightly. It was such a subtle movement. Lila nearly missed it. "I think you need one," she decided. "Everyone does, even if no one said it in a long time." She glanced at the sky. The clouds were shifting, darkening. "How about Zephyr?" The wind blew lightly through the grass as if replying. "I don't know what it means," she admitted. But it sounds like the kind of name a dog like you might remember. The dog didn't move. But then, his ears perked, just a little, and his tail gave a slow, deliberate thump against the ground. Lila's face lit up. You like that, don't you? Zephyr. A voice behind her shattered the quiet. There she is again, feeding that stray. Lila turned. Mr. Donaldson, the neighborhood insurance agent, was walking toward them with his wife, both wearing their Sunday best and scowls that could curdle milk. That dog's still here? He huffed. Unbelievable. I called the city yesterday. They said someone would come out this week. Lila stood protectively in front of Zephyr. He's not dangerous, she said. Mrs. Donaldson scoffed. You can't possibly know that, young lady. Just look at the thing. It's covered in scars. He's not a thing, Lila snapped. Rebecca approached quickly, eyes flicking between her daughter and the rising tension. Mr. Donaldson, she said carefully, I understand your concerns, but my daughter isn't trying to cause trouble. She's just... What she's doing is putting herself at risk, he interrupted. That's a wild animal, probably from a fighting ring. Why else would it look like that? Zephyr shifted behind Lila, not in fear, not in aggression. He simply sat up straighter. Lila turned toward him, then back to the couple. He doesn't fight, she said. He surrenders. The silence that followed was thick. He's just tired, Lila whispered, suddenly feeling tears sting her eyes. Tired of people yelling, tired of hurting, tired of being looked at like garbage. Mr. Donaldson opened his mouth, but said nothing. Rebecca stepped beside her daughter and placed a hand gently on her back. We'll be going now, she said with quiet finality. Come on, Lila. But as they turned to leave, Zephyr did something no one expected. He stood. His legs were shaking, his stance wobbly, but he rose to his full height. His eyes scanned the small gathering of people around him. Then, he took a single step toward Lila and nudged his nose softly into her hand. And for the first time since he'd arrived, his tail wagged. Not a flick, not a twitch, but a slow, grateful sweep of hope. Lila smiled through her tears. See, Mama? He's not invisible anymore. By the time Lila and Rebecca returned home that afternoon, the weight of everything that had happened at the park clung to them like wet leaves. Lila didn't speak much during the drive. She just stared out the passenger side window, her fingers idly tracing circles on the fogged-up glass. Rebecca kept glancing at her daughter. Lila's silence wasn't the sulking kind. It was quieter than that, deeper. The kind of silence you fall into when your heart starts carrying something too big for your age. That night, as Rebecca tucked Lila into bed, she hesitated at the door. Sweetheart, she said gently, I know you care about him, but sometimes caring isn't enough to fix everything. Lila looked up from beneath her blankets. But it's enough to start something, isn't it? Rebecca didn't answer. She just turned off the light and closed the door behind her. The next morning, Lila was already dressed before the alarm even rang. She had a granola bar in her pocket and a plastic container of cold chicken from the fridge tucked under her arm. Rebecca found her by the front door, boots laced, eyes bright. You're going again? He might be hungry, Lila said simply. Rebecca sighed. Just 10 minutes, and I'm coming with you. But Zephyr wasn't at the tree. Lila stopped so fast her boots slid in the grass. The space beneath the maple was empty. She dropped to her knees, eyes darting across the park, searching every shadow, every corner. Where is he? She whispered. He never leaves. Rebecca scanned the field. Maybe someone took him. No, Lila said. He would have waited for me. Just then, something stirred behind the trash bins near the restrooms. A rustle, a sharp exhale. Lila turned, and then she saw him. Zephyr was curled behind the dumpsters, barely visible. His body was half concealed in shadow, but even from where she stood, Lila could tell something was wrong. He looked smaller. No, he looked broken. She ran to him. "Zephyr!" she cried, dropping to the ground beside him. He lifted his head sluggishly. One of his ears was bleeding. A new scratch ran down his snout, raw and crusted. Lila gasped. "Who did this to you?" Rebecca knelt beside them, her face pale. "Oh no, that wasn't there yesterday." Lila opened the container of chicken with trembling hands. Zephyr didn't lunge for the food. He waited, slow, gentle. His tongue barely touched her fingers as he took the first piece. "He still trusts us," Lila whispered, "even after they hurt him." Rebecca's jaw tightened. Someone must have done this last night. Behind them, footsteps echoed on the path. Rebecca turned quickly, shielding Lila with one arm. It was Mr. Donaldson again. But he wasn't alone. A tall man with a stiff walk and a clipboard was beside him. He wore khaki slacks and a dark polo shirt that read County Animal Welfare Division in white print. His sunglasses sat too tightly on his face, like they weren't meant for comfort. The man nodded once toward Zephyr. "That's the one?" Donaldson gave a satisfied grunt. Same dog, same location, still a public risk. Lila stood protectively in front of Zephyr. "He didn't hurt anyone." The man didn't even look at her. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Rebecca, "we've received 2 separate complaints about this animal. We're authorized to remove him and evaluate his risk to the public." "No," Lila said. "You can't." Rebecca stepped between them. "Wait a minute. This dog hasn't attacked anyone. He's scared, injured, and unlicensed," the man cut in. "Unvaccinated and stray. If you interfere, you assume liability." Lila dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around Zephyr's neck. He didn't growl. He didn't snap. He leaned into her touch, trembling slightly. The man reached for his radio, but then another voice cut through the air like a knife. "That won't be necessary." Everyone turned. An elderly man in a worn military jacket stood at the edge of the path. His silver hair was cropped short, his posture rigid, his gaze steady. He walked slowly toward the group, his boots crunching over gravel. The man from Animal Control raised an eyebrow. "And you are?" "Name's Frank Holloway," the old man said. "Retired police sergeant. And that dog," he pointed toward Zephyr, "doesn't belong in a pound. He belongs with me." The agent scoffed. "Unless you've got paperwork, sir, I'm still taking the dog." Frank stepped closer. He knelt beside Zephyr. The dog's cloudy eyes shifted, and something changed. His ears perked. His body stiffened. Then, he licked the man's hand. Frank's voice cracked. "I knew it. I thought I was crazy, but it's him." Rebecca frowned. "You know this dog?" Frank nodded. "His name's Shadow. He was my K9 partner for 8 years. Went missing 2 years ago while I was in cancer treatment. They told me he ran away, but I never believed it." Lila looked from the dog to the man. "His name is Zephyr," she said softly. Frank smiled, eyes misting. "Looks like he got a new name while he was gone." The animal control agent took a step forward. "Even so, sir." "I have microchip records," Frank said, rising to his full height. "I'll show you. Right now. You're not taking him." Zephyr, Shadow, stood slowly and moved between Lila and the man in uniform. For the first time, he looked like he remembered who he was. like a spark had been relit. The man hesitated. If the dog is registered to you, we'll verify it. Until then, he's not going anywhere. Rebecca whispered to Lila. How did he know to come today? Lila shrugged, her arms around Zephyr's neck. Maybe heroes find each other again. They sat beneath the maple tree like it was holy ground. Shadow, lay with his head resting against Lila's leg, as if she were the only anchor keeping him from drifting away again. His body still trembled now and then, but there was weight to him now. Presence. As if each word from the man sitting beside them pulled another piece of him back into the world. Frank Holloway had removed his cap, revealing a scar that traced from his temple to the edge of his jaw. He didn't hide it. He wore it like his badge. Faded, but earned. He wasn't just any K9, Frank said, staring at Shadow. He was trained for tracking. Human scent, narcotics, even explosives. Shadow was sharp, never missed a detail. Saved more than a few lives. Lila's fingers gently scratched behind the dog's ragged ear. What happened to him? Frank inhaled slowly. The kind of breath that carries weight. I got sick. Cancer. It came on fast, and I was forced into treatment. Couldn't take care of him. I trusted a fellow officer to keep him safe while I was gone. A man named Bradley. Rebecca, sitting nearby on the picnic bench, frowned. And? Frank's jaw clenched. Bradley told me Shadow escaped. Disappeared through a hole in the fence. Said he looked everywhere. But I never believed him. Shadow never ran. Not once in 8 years. Even during gunfire. He paused, reaching into his coat pocket and pulling out an old dog tag. The silver disc was scratched but still legible. It read, Shadow, K9 Unit 9. Handler, Sergeant Frank Holloway. Shadow sniffed it, then pressed his nose into Frank's palm. Lila watched the moment unfold, eyes wide. He remembers. Frank nodded. Yeah, he does. But just as the warmth of reunion settled over the group, the man from Animal Control returned from his van, holding a handheld scanner. His expression had shifted, less certain now. I verified the chip. It matches Sergeant Holloway's registration records. He's officially Shadow, and he's property of the Rosefield Police Department's retired K9 unit. Rebecca stood, relief softening her shoulders. So that means he's safe? You're not taking him? The man nodded reluctantly. He's off the books. Not our jurisdiction anymore. Lila hugged Shadow tighter, but then something flickered in the air. A ripple, a shadow that hadn't been there before. Frank noticed it too. His eyes narrowed at the line of parked cars across the street. A black sedan, windows too dark. License plate half covered in mud. It hadn't been there earlier. He leaned closer to Rebecca. Has that car been following you? She blinked. I don't think so. Frank watched Shadow. The dog's ears perked. He lifted his head, alert now. His body stiffened, not with fear, but with instinct. He stared at the sedan and let out a low, throaty rumble. That's not a coincidence, Frank muttered. He recognizes it. Lila whispered. You mean the people who hurt him? Frank's eyes didn't leave the car. They're watching. Suddenly, the sedan's engine started. It didn't peel away. It rolled, slowly, around the corner and vanished from sight. Shadow whined softly, then rose to his feet, his entire frame tense. Frank stood up with him. They know he's been found, and they won't give him up without a fight. Rebecca paled. But why? Why go through so much trouble for a dog? Frank looked at her grimly. Because he's not just a dog. He's a threat, a witness. He lowered his voice. I've seen this before. Retired K9s get stolen all the time. sold into fighting rings or worse. But Shadow wasn't just stolen. He was targeted. Trained canines like him can detect buried weapons, cash, drugs. He's valuable to criminals for what he knows and what he can be forced to do. Lila's hand tightened on Shadow's fur. But he'd never help bad people. No, Frank agreed, but that wouldn't stop them from trying. A silence settled. Then Rebecca asked the question no one wanted to speak aloud. Do you think Officer Bradley sold him? Frank didn't blink. I think Bradley got paid to look the other way, and I think whoever took Shadow thought they buried him deep enough to never surface again. He glanced at Lila. But they didn't count on a 6-year-old with crackers and a stubborn heart. Lila looked up, defiant. I saw him, when no one else did. Frank smiled. And that's why you're in danger now, too. Back at the Parker home that evening, the atmosphere was different. Still, tense. Rebecca double-checked the locks, closed the curtains, charged her phone to 100%. A shadow lay curled near the front door, not sleeping, not resting, watching. Frank sat at the kitchen table, filling out a report with an old police notebook. Lila sat beside him, drawing a picture of a dog with big ears and a crooked tail. This is his badge, she explained, pointing to a gold sticker on the dog's collar. Frank looked at the sketch and smiled, then turned serious. I'm going to call someone, a friend still on the force. Name's Detective Rodriguez. He's handled cases like this before. Rebecca poured herself a mug of tea she'd never drink. Frank, is this really happening? This isn't just paranoia? Frank didn't answer with words. He pointed toward the front window. Shadow had stood up, growling. Lila ran over, peeking through the curtain. The black sedan was back, parked across the street. This time the engine didn't shut off. It just sat there, watching, waiting. The storm rolled in just after sunset. Not the kind that arrived with warning, the slow build of gray clouds, the polite rumble of thunder. No, this storm came in fast, angry. Lightning snapped like broken bone across the sky, and the rain fell hard enough to blur the world behind a sheet of silver. Inside the Parker home, the lights flickered once, then again, then went out completely. Great, Rebecca muttered, holding up her phone to check for signal. Nothing. In the living room, Lila sat on the rug with Shadow pressed beside her. She'd wrapped a towel around his shoulders like a cape, whispering stories to him under her breath. And then the night said, no dragon is too scary if it's only hurting because someone stole its treasure. That's what you are, Shadow. A knight. And your treasure's just been love this whole time. Shadow didn't make a sound, but his head lowered until it rested in her lap. His eyes, still cloudy, blinked slowly. Calm, alert, trusting. Frank Holloway paced by the window, arms crossed tightly over his chest. You feel it too? He asked. Rebecca nodded. Yeah, like something's about to break. She moved toward the window, pulling the curtains open just a sliver. The car's still there. The black sedan hadn't moved all day. Sometimes its headlights flickered, sometimes not. But no one ever got out. It just sat. Patient, still, watching. Frank grunted. They're waiting for the right moment. And storms like this? They make good cover. A crack of thunder cut through the room. Lila jumped slightly, and Shadow's ears twitched. But he didn't growl. Not yet. Frank checked his watch. We need to stay close. Phones are dead. Landline's out. Best we can do is hold tight and hope the cavalry shows up if things go south. Rebecca bit her lip. And if they don't? We make it hard to take him, Frank said. very hard. At 11:42 p.m., the back fence creaked. Not loud, not obvious. Just a soft shift in the rain's rhythm. Shadow stood up instantly. Lila felt it before she saw it. His body pressed against hers, tense, unmoving. His hackles lifted, muscles tight, like he was holding back a part of himself only ever used in war. Frank crossed the room in 3 strides. Where? Backyard, Rebecca said, already grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. A second later, they heard it. The unmistakable sound of a window latch sliding open. Frank dropped to a crouch beside Lila. Upstairs. Now. But... No questions, he said, voice tight. Take Shadow. Lock your door. Don't open it unless you hear me say the word peanut butter. Got it? Lila blinked. That's a silly... That's the point, she nodded. Come on, Shadow. But Shadow didn't move. He planted himself by the front door, muscles rippling, tail stiff. Lightning flashed behind him, illuminating his silhouette against the dark windows. I'm not leaving him, Lila said, her voice suddenly breaking. He won't leave me, and I won't leave him. Before Rebecca or Frank could answer, a shadow moved across the back wall, closer now. Then, crash. The window by the laundry room exploded inward. A man in a dark raincoat pushed through the shattered frame, boots squelching on wet tile. He moved fast, military fast, his face covered by a scarf, his right hand holding a small black device with a needle tip. Frank whispered, "Tranquilizer." Shadow's growl filled the entire house. It wasn't just a warning, it was a war cry. The man saw the dog and lunged. Shadow didn't wait. The German shepherd launched forward, teeth bared, body low and precise. He didn't bark, didn't make a sound. He hit the man like a bolt of lightning, clamping his jaws around the attacker's forearm. The man shouted, dropped the tranquilizer gun, and staggered backward, smashing into the kitchen table. "Don't hurt him!" Lila cried, running forward. Rebecca grabbed her. "Stay back!" Frank grabbed the nearest chair, swinging it toward the intruder as he scrambled to his feet. The man drew a second device from his belt, something metallic with a blinking red light. But before he could use it, Rebecca moved. She hurled the flashlight across the kitchen, hitting the man square in the temple. He fell. Shadow stood over him, growling low, teeth inches from the man's throat, but not biting. Waiting. "I think," Frank said, breathless. "He remembers his training just fine." Rebecca exhaled, her hands shaking. "Lila, are you okay?" Lila nodded slowly. "Shadow didn't let him get me." "No," Frank said, stepping forward. "And he never would." The police arrived 10 minutes later. Backup had finally been dispatched when a neighbor, hearing the commotion over the storm, called in a report of a break-in. Detective Rodriguez arrived with soaked shoes and no patience. "This wasn't random," he said after hearing the story. "Professionals, fast, coordinated, they knew the layout." He knelt beside the unconscious man, checking his gear. Modified animal-grade tranquilizers, fingerprint gloves, tactical radio with an encrypted channel. Then he turned to Frank. "This wasn't a botched theft. This was a retrieval." Rebecca looked at him sharply. "Of Shadow?" Rodriguez nodded. "Someone wants him back." Frank's eyes narrowed. "What about Bradley?" "We've reopened the internal investigation. His finances, connections, everything. If he's involved, we'll find it." Lila stepped forward, Shadow beside her like a shadow in truth. "Will they come again?" No one answered, but Shadow did. He growled, low and sure, and turned toward the window. Because outside, through the sheets of rain, a second car had just arrived, and whoever was inside wasn't getting out yet. But they would. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a sky so blue it almost felt cruel. The kind of clear, radiant morning that made people believe the world was safe again. But inside the Parker home, nothing felt safe. A police cruiser was still parked out front. Yellow tape flapped weakly across the side gate. The busted window had been boarded up, and the kitchen still smelled like rain and adrenaline. Rebecca sat at the kitchen table, both hands wrapped tightly around a mug of cold coffee. She hadn't touched it. Frank stood by the front door with Shadow beside him, the dog's body pressed against his leg. Not for affection, but readiness. Always alert now. Detective Rodriguez paced the living room, flipping through a thin manila folder. "This is what we know," he said finally. "The man who broke into your house last night has no ID, no prints in any system. The equipment he brought matches gear used in high-value animal thefts across 3 states. Rebecca swallowed. "So this is a network?" "Yes," Rodriguez said. "Organized, funded, and most importantly, well-connected." He set the folder down, looking at Frank. "You were right. Bradley wasn't just negligent. He's dirty. Internal Affairs found an undeclared overseas wire transfer to his account, $43,000, 6 months after Shadow disappeared." Frank exhaled, voice like gravel. "That bastard sold him." "And not just him," Rodriguez added. "We believe Bradley helped arrange the theft of at least 4 other K-9s over the past 5 years. Always the high performers, the ones trained for scent tracking and tactical response." Rebecca stood slowly. "But what could they possibly want with dogs like Shadow? They can't just retrain them." "No," Frank said before Rodriguez could answer. "But they can use them. You get a dog like Shadow into the wrong hands, criminals can figure out how to reverse engineer his behavior, sniff out police units, evade detection, even help smuggle drugs by sensing the absence of threat. The kind of subtle skill you can't buy, unless you steal it." Rodriguez added grimly, "We also think they may have tried to break his conditioning through abuse. Take the obedience, twist the loyalty." Lila had been listening from the stairs the whole time, curled halfway between the 3rd and 4th step, Shadow's old dog tag clutched in her hand. Now she stepped into view. "He didn't break," she said quietly. Everyone turned. "He didn't help them," Lila repeated, stronger now. "No matter what they did, he waited, and then he came back to us." Rodriguez looked at her, something soft crossing his face. "You're right, kiddo. He didn't break. That's why they're desperate." Shadow stood slowly, sensing the weight in the air. Frank nodded. "They're not going to stop." That afternoon, Rodriguez parked his unmarked car outside the house again and called Frank and Rebecca into the living room. His laptop screen showed a still frame from security footage pulled from a nearby gas station. There was Bradley, still in uniform, entering a black SUV. The timestamp? 2 hours before the break-in. "He never retired," Rodriguez said. "The Florida house, the early pension, it's a cover. He's still here, running this thing from inside." Frank stared at the screen like it was a ghost. "He was my trainee 10 years ago. I taught him everything I knew." "And he used it to vanish dogs like Shadow," Rodriguez muttered. "We've issued a warrant, but we need to catch him in the act." Rebecca leaned forward. "Meaning?" Rodriguez hesitated. "Meaning, we want to use Shadow as bait." "No," Lila said, her voice rising before anyone else could speak. "You can't!" Everyone turned to her. She stood with both fists clenched, tears brimming but not falling. "He's not bait! He's not a trap! He's a person! You can't use him!" Rodriguez knelt so they were eye to eye. "Lila, I promise you, we'd never let anything happen to him. He'd be protected, monitored. The minute Bradley or his people show, we close in." "You don't understand," she whispered. "If you take him back into that darkness again, he might not come back this time." Frank stepped forward. "Then we don't do it." Rodriguez stood. "We don't have another lead. If Bradley gets away again, this ring keeps going. More dogs, more families." Shadow moved closer to Lila and rested his head against her hand. Everyone watched as Lila went still. Then she whispered, "There has to be another way." That night, long after Rodriguez had gone, Frank and Rebecca sat at the kitchen table, whispering over city maps and timeline charts. Lila was in her room with the door cracked open, watching the shadows move under the hall light. Shadow lay across her doorway like a sentinel. She slid off the bed and crawled next to him. "I won't let them take you," she said into his fur. "Not back into that." Shadow didn't react at first. Then slowly, he reached out with his paw, placed it gently over her arm, and exhaled. Lila felt her heart swell, and something inside her hardened too. An hour later, while the house was quiet and the adults whispered plans, Lila packed her backpack, a flashlight, her pink jacket, 3 granola bars, a bottle of water, and Shadow's old collar. "Come on," she whispered to the dog. "We're going someplace safe." Shadow followed without hesitation. She knew exactly where to go. The treehouse in Miller's Woods. Mr. Frank had told her stories about it once. Hidden, high, quiet, perfect. Because Lila had decided something the grown-ups hadn't. If they wouldn't protect Shadow the right way, she would. The streetlights flickered behind them as Lila and Shadow slipped down the alley behind their house, her backpack bouncing softly against her shoulders, his paws silent on the wet pavement. Miller's Woods was only 3 blocks away, but under the cover of night, it felt like another country. The wind moved through the trees like whispers, and every distant car door or barking dog made Lila flinch. But Shadow didn't stop once. He stayed by her side, close enough to touch, scanning every sound like he was still on duty. Lila gripped the straps of her backpack tighter and whispered, "Almost there." They'd crossed into the tree line before anyone in the house knew they were gone. She didn't leave a note. She didn't need to. She knew her mom would panic. She also knew her mom would try to use Shadow as bait again. And Lila couldn't let that happen. The treehouse was real. Just like Mr. Frank had said, it stood hidden in a grove of old sycamores, 20 feet off the ground, its walls slanted but strong, its ladder intact, though some of the rungs groaned under Shadow's weight as he climbed. Lila didn't even question it. Shadow was a police dog. He could climb. Once inside, Lila pulled out a small camping lantern and switched it on. Its soft yellow glow pushed back the dark just enough to reveal a dusty sleeping bag, a few old crates, and a spider web so thick it looked like a curtain. Shadow curled beside the far wall, his body between Lila and the door. Protective, watchful. She sat cross-legged in front of him, hands folded in her lap. "I know they'll be mad," she whispered, "but I had to." Shadow blinked slowly, then placed his head on her feet like an answer. Lila looked out the small square window toward the forest below. The moon was climbing, but clouds gathered again on the horizon. Somewhere out there, someone was hunting them. But for now, they were safe. Back at the Parker house, the panic set in like a house fire. Rebecca found the open back gate first, then the missing backpack, then the collar. She took him, she said aloud, her voice breaking. She ran. Frank stood frozen in the doorway, fists clenched, eyes wide. Why would she? She didn't trust us, Rebecca whispered. She thought we'd let him be taken again. Rodriguez arrived 10 minutes later. 2 squad cars pulled in behind him, lights flashing in the night. She's smart, Frank said quickly. She's not trying to run. She's trying to hide, and I think I know where. The treehouse window was fogging over by the time Lila heard the first branch snap. Not close, but not far either. Shadow stood, not barking, not growling, just standing, ears forward. Lila crawled to the window, pulled back a flap of canvas that acted like a makeshift curtain, and peeked through the misty glass. 2 men, walking, dark clothes, flashlights off. One held something in his hand, something metal. Lila's heart slammed against her ribs. Shadow began to growl, soft, low, a sound like distant thunder. "They found us," she whispered. She reached into her backpack and pulled out the tiny walkie-talkie Frank had given her last Christmas. It barely worked across the yard, but maybe, just maybe, it still had a voice left. She clicked it on and pressed the button. "Mr. Frank," she whispered into the static. "We're at the treehouse. They're coming." Frank's radio crackled just as he and Rodriguez arrived at Miller's Woods trailhead. The voice was thin, warbled, but unmistakable. Lila. Rodriguez barked into his own radio, calling for backup, directing the squad cars toward the southern path. But Frank didn't wait. He ran, 71 years old, lungs wheezing, legs stiff, but he ran like he had 2 hearts pounding in his chest. In the treehouse, Lila crouched low, shadow pressed against her. Voices below. Not loud, not angry, calm, calculated. "Kid," a man's voice called up, soft and coaxing. "You've got something that doesn't belong to you." Lila's fingers dug into the floorboards. "He belongs with me," she shouted back. "No, sweetheart," the voice replied. "He belongs to someone else, someone who paid a lot for him." Shadow growled louder. The ladder creaked. Lila grabbed the flashlight and pointed it down the hatch. A hand appeared, then a foot. The man's face was mostly hidden, mask, hood, but she could see his eyes. Flat, cold. Shadow surged forward, but Lila stopped him. "Wait!" The man climbed higher, then froze, because Lila was holding something in both hands. A photograph of Shadow, next to a man in uniform. Frank. "You're too late," Lila said. "I already gave him back to his real partner." Then she pointed behind the man. The flashlight beam caught Frank's face, just as he raised a heavy branch like a club and brought it down. The man toppled. Shadow leapt. The second attacker in the woods saw the scene unfold from below and turned to run. But a line of squad cars had already sealed off the forest path behind him. He didn't make it 50 feet. Back at the treehouse, Lila cried for the first time since she'd left home. Not from fear, from relief. Frank scooped her into his arms, and Shadow pressed in close. "You shouldn't have done that," Frank said softly. "But I had to," Lila whispered. "He trusted me." Frank held her tighter. "And you never broke that trust," he said. "Not for 1 second." They sat on the edge of the police station's back steps, just after sunrise, while the world around them slowly exhaled. Lila's pink hoodie was soaked and streaked with dirt. Her braid had mostly unraveled. Her hands were scraped from the ladder rungs, and her face was streaked with silent, exhausted tears. But she wasn't crying anymore, because Shadow, warm, real, alive, lay curled beside her, his head resting in her lap like he'd always belonged there. Frank sat on the other side, quietly sipping coffee from a paper cup someone had handed him without asking. Detective Rodriguez stood in front of them, his expression unreadable. "They confessed," he said. Lila blinked. "All of it?" Rodriguez nodded. "They worked for a man named Vernon Gage, wealthy ex-military, lives just outside of Atlanta. He's been collecting stolen working dogs for years, K9s, military trackers, bomb sniffers, then selling them to overseas buyers. Shadow was one of the few that got away." Frank's jaw tightened. "Bradley? Arrested an hour ago. He didn't even deny it. Said the department undervalued the dogs, so he reallocated them. Said he never expected anyone to care this much about an animal." Shadow let out a low huff at that, almost like he understood. Rodriguez chuckled without humor. "Guess he never met Lila." Lila ran her fingers along the curve of Shadow's ear. "He never broke." Rodriguez looked at her, then crouched down so they were eye level. "No," he said softly. "He didn't. And neither did you." Later that morning, they returned home. Not to fear this time, but to flowers on the porch. A small banner hung across the fence in marker-scrawled letters. "Thank you, Lila and Shadow." Mrs. Chen next door came over with warm banana bread. The mailman honked and waved from the street. A group of kids on scooters stopped out front just to ask, "Is that the hero dog?" And somehow, in the span of a night, the world had begun to see what Lila had seen all along. Shadow wasn't a threat. He was hope, worn and weathered, but still standing. By the following week, news crews had arrived. Local, then regional, then national. Lila didn't like the cameras, not really. She didn't like how they always wanted her to smile more, or say that again, but louder. But she sat beside Shadow for each interview, one hand always resting on his back, and answered their questions as simply as she could. "Why did you run away?" "Because I didn't want the grown-ups to use him like a trap." "Weren't you scared?" "A little, but he was more scared, and he was alone." "What made you trust him?" "He looked at me like he hoped I wouldn't leave." Sometimes the reporters cried. Sometimes the cameramen did too. Frank received a call from the mayor's office 2 days later. "They want to hold a ceremony," he told Rebecca and Lila over breakfast. "Give you two a key to the city." Rebecca smiled tiredly. "Do they know it was technically a kidnapping case?" "They're choosing not to focus on that part." Lila frowned. "Can Shadow come?" "They're giving him a medal," Frank said. Lila nodded once. "Then I'll go." The ceremony was small but heartfelt. It was held at Rosefield Park, beneath the same red maple tree where everything had started. The mayor gave a short speech. Lila wore a clean yellow dress. Shadow had a new collar with a brass tag that read, "K9 Shadow, retired, never forgotten." They didn't make Lila talk, but she stepped up anyway. Clutching the dog tag Frank had given her, she looked out over the crowd. Neighbors, police, reporters, strangers. "Sometimes," she said softly, "you have to be the first one to see someone again, even when the whole world looks away." Then she sat back down, and Shadow placed his paw gently in her lap, like he knew that was the most important thing anyone would say that day. That night, as the sun dipped low, painting the world in amber and violet, Frank leaned against the Parkers' front porch railing, watching as Lila and Shadow played in the grass. "She changed him," he said. Rebecca stood beside him, arms folded. "He changed her too." "I've seen partners," Frank said. "Good ones. Ones that trusted each other to walk into danger. But I've never seen a bond like that." Rebecca looked down. So what happens now? He can't live with you, not in the retirement home. No, Frank said. But I was thinking, maybe he doesn't have to choose. She raised an eyebrow. We split custody, he said. Like divorced parents, but less bitter. I visit every day, help with training, medical, and maybe they both get to keep each other. Rebecca smiled. I think you just made a 6-year-old's dream come true. That night, as Lila lay in bed, Shadow stretched out across the rug by her feet. She whispered into the dark. Do you feel it, boy? Like something big is about to start? Shadow didn't move, but the tip of his tail thumped once, then twice, as if to say, I've always known. 3 months later, the wind carried a different sound through Rosefield Park. Not whispers of judgment or distant sirens, but laughter. Children's voices, the rustle of picnic blankets, the squeak of freshly oiled swings, and somewhere in the middle of it all, the rhythmic tapping of paws against paved path. Shadow walked slowly, but with purpose. His gait was still stiff, especially on rainy days, and his left ear would never stand upright again. But his eyes, once clouded by pain and neglect, now shimmered with light, alert and full of something that had taken months to return. Joy. Beside him, Lila walked in a small navy jacket with a silver badge sewn over the heart. Junior community officer, Shadow's partner. She'd made the patch herself, with glitter glue. On the grass ahead, a small stage had been set up beneath the old red maple tree. Rows of folding chairs faced it. Balloons in blue and white swayed gently in the late spring breeze. People were gathering. News vans, city council members, families from 3 counties over, and cameras, so many cameras, some for TV, some for live streams. Rebecca adjusted the bow in Lila's hair as they reached the stage steps. Are you ready, sweetheart? Lila looked up. Is Shadow? Rebecca smiled. Shadow's been ready since the day he found you. Lila squeezed her mother's hand. He didn't find me. We found each other. Frank Holloway stood waiting at the podium, wearing his old police uniform. Clean, pressed, every medal in its proper place. When he saw them arrive, he stepped down and opened his arms. Shadow moved first, pressing his head against Frank's knee with the quiet dignity of an old soldier returning to his general. I guess you heard, Frank said to Lila as he knelt. They're renaming the park. Lila's eyes widened. Really? Frank nodded toward the black cloth covering a new plaque at the foot of the stage. It's not just a park anymore. It's a promise. When the mayor stepped up to the podium, the crowd hushed. Today, she began, we honor 2 heroes. One, a retired K-9 officer who endured the worst of mankind and still chose to protect. The other, a 6-year-old girl who saw what the rest of us refused to look at and decided that kindness was more important than fear. Applause rippled like thunder. But more than that, the mayor continued. Today we recognize that second chances are not just possible, they are necessary, they are powerful, and sometimes they come from the smallest places. She turned to Lila and Shadow. And so from this day forward, this place shall be known as Second Chances Park. The black cloth was pulled away, revealing a bronze plaque etched with 2 figures, a little girl with a braid and a tall German shepherd at her side, in honor of Lila Parker and K-9 Shadow, for reminding us that no soul is ever too broken to be seen. Lila didn't speak at the mic. She didn't have to. Instead, she knelt beside Shadow, kissed the side of his face, and whispered, "Now everyone knows." In the months that followed, Lila and Shadow became something rare. Not just a story, but a message. They visited schools together, teaching children how to approach scared animals and scared people with gentleness first. They helped rehome 3 other retired K9s, trained but forgotten, who now lived with families that had once feared dogs completely. Frank went with them on every trip. He taught Lila how to give Shadow commands in quiet hand signals, how to read his posture, how to respect his triggers. And in return, Lila taught Frank how to tie friendship bracelets, and which books made Shadow wag his tail the most when read aloud. Rebecca watched it all with awe. Somehow, this one act of kindness, this one moment beneath a tree, had rippled through their lives like a stone across water. And one afternoon, as the last leaves of summer began to turn, a letter arrived. It was from a boy in Oklahoma. Dear Lila and Shadow, I used to be scared of dogs because my brother got bit once. But then I saw your story, and I thought maybe not all dogs are mean. So I asked my mom if we could go to the shelter and meet a sad-looking dog. Now we have Cheddar. He's missing one leg, but he sleeps next to my bed every night. I'm not scared anymore. Thank you. Love, Mason, age 8. Lila read it twice, then tucked it into a shoebox with other letters they'd started getting. She added a gold star sticker to the top and looked at Shadow. We did good, huh? Shadow gave a low, happy woof. On the 1-year anniversary, they returned to the spot where they met. Frank brought lawn chairs. Rebecca brought lemon bars. Lila brought Shadow's favorite toy, a squeaky rubber squirrel with one leg missing. And Shadow? Shadow brought himself. He lay beneath the red maple, tail flicking lazily, eyes half-lidded with peace. Frank placed a second plaque in the ground beside the first. To the ones who wait, hoping someone still sees them, you are seen. You are wanted. You are home. Lila whispered, Shadow, do you know how many people you helped? And maybe it was just the wind, or maybe it was something else entirely. But his tail thumped 3 times, then stopped. Lila leaned closer and whispered, Me too. Sometimes the world doesn't need heroes with capes. Sometimes it just needs one girl who refuses to look away, and one dog who refuses to give up. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Like, subscribe, and never stop seeing what others refuse to see.